Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Intelligence at the Edge. I'm your host, Chip Usher. Today, I'm joined by Heather Conley, who's a non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a former president of the German Marshall Fund. Today, we're talking about Arctic security and the situation involving Greenland. Heather is one of the leading experts on this topic, and we unpack the value of Greenland to U.S. national security, the potential for Greenland as an economic resource and source of critical minerals, and what comes next in the transatlantic relationship over the issue of Greenland. Please enjoy the show. As always, your comments are welcome at inteledge@scsp.ai. Heather Conley, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Chip, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much.
So today is Wednesday, the 28th of January, a cold and frigid morning in the Washington, D.C. area. So the perfect ambiance to talk about Greenland and the Arctic with a true expert. It's an honor to have you. I wanted to kind of first see if we could provide some background for our audience members about President Trump's interest in Greenland and the Arctic. He has said that the United States needs to have ownership control of Greenland for national security purposes. And for our audience, Greenland's strategic location has always made it of importance to the United States for ballistic missile defense, for patrolling of northern sea lanes. But what is it that you think the White House is perceiving is going on right now with Russia and with China and their activities in the Arctic and around Greenland?
Well, I mean, President Trump is absolutely right. Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark are really important to U.S. national security and has been certainly over the last century because, exactly as you noted, it's a key strategic location that provides sort of first line of defense, early warning of missiles, of Russian nuclear submarines, and it provides that essential eyes and ears to maintain openness of the sea lines and sea lanes of communication between North America and Europe. So it has been geostrategic for a very, very long time. What we're seeing now with the environmental transformation of the Arctic, we're now seeing and anticipating a lot more maritime commercial activity, scientific activity. And so we really need to make sure we have eyes and ears, persistent presence in the North Atlantic. And Greenland, again, that strategic location represents important front line for the United States. So I think what's really hard and what I've been trying to do is separate why the Arctic is important to U.S. national security, why we see Russia and China understanding the strategic imperative of the Arctic and putting more military, economic, scientific presence in the region, and separate that from President Trump's clear desire, and I think as a real estate professional who sees himself in a unique place in history to expand American territory, I think he has been very focused on ownership, acquisition, the historical nature of it, that he doesn't feel comfortable unless the United States owns it, it can't control it. But that goes against, as I said, not only 225 years of diplomatic relations between the United States and the Kingdom of Denmark, where we have one of the strongest bilateral relationships ever. We don't need to own it. We have this great relationship, and the Kingdom of Denmark and the Greenlandic government are poised to do more. But unfortunately, because the president has been so fixed on ownership acquisition, we've now, unfortunately, really, eroded and, if not anything, sort of really dented the trust and credibility of one of our most important allies.
So what I hear you talking about is how the warming of the Arctic region has sort of opened up the sea lanes, maybe made it more economically feasible to conduct industrial and mining activities in places like Greenland. Has the military presence of Russia or of China um, like grown at the same pace? Are they becoming more active? I was reading
There's
how, I guess in 2024, they actually did some joint exercises in the Arctic region. So what are they doing militarily?
Yeah, I mean, let's take each one separately and then talk about them combined a little bit. So, let's talk. Russia is a superpower in the Arctic. It has well over 50% of the Arctic coastline. The Arctic is home to Russia's strategic nuclear forces. I mentioned the nuclear submarines, which are based on the Kola Peninsula. And it has always viewed the Arctic as extremely important to its future, not only military survival, but as well as its economic development. And certainly Vladimir Putin has seen the remilitarization of the Arctic, the economic development of the Arctic as a key element of his leadership, and as well as sort of restoring Russia's greatness. So what we've seen, really began about 2014. Russia began to rebuild its military presence across the Arctic. I think for Greenland in particular, what I focus on is the Russian archipelago Franz Josef Land and one of the most northern islands, Alexanderland. They've created a new military base where they have their most advanced fighter aircraft. That is, 1,000 kilometers from Greenland. It's 400 kilometers from the Norwegian archipelago, Svalbard, where we're seeing a lot of Russian hybrid activity. So we're seeing that. And then, of course, Russia's continued development, modernizing its nuclear submarine fleet, its hypersonic cruise missiles, hypersonic ballistic missiles, its undersea capabilities, uncrewed underwater vehicles. We're seeing its drone capacity. So we're definitely seeing a bigger Russia presence, and they have been pressing in the Arctic, not only in the North Atlantic, but then certainly the North Pacific. We'll talk about that in a second. China. So China has expressed a desire to be a great polar power by 2030. And China's expression has mostly been economic and scientific. And we know China's presence, economic or scientific, has a dual use purpose, PLA, PLAN, affiliations with most of this activity. We saw about 5-7 years ago, Greenland was an example of this, where the Polar Silk Road, China's Belt and Road Initiative in the Arctic, was trying to link ports and infrastructure and mining. But the Nordic countries, Canada, really resisted that, pushed that back very much because of American diplomacy, very much concerned about that footprint. And so we've seen that diminish. But China's scientific presence, particularly, they have now 5 icebreakers. They have manned submersibles. They're doing a lot of science on the seabed floor. Then that's for, acoustics, potential future submarine activity. So that's what they're doing separately. Together, you're absolutely right. And we're seeing that activity not in the North Atlantic, not around Greenland, but we're seeing that in the North Pacific, the Bering Straits, near and around Alaska.
I see.
Combined operations, air dimension, again, maritime components. And we're seeing a larger Chinese economic presence along the Russian Far East, port of Vladivostok, because they're gaining Russian LNG sources, mineral resources. And so we're going to see a lot more Chinese maritime traffic in the North Pacific. That what concerns me, honestly, the most, that we need a much better intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance presence, satellite sensors. We need a more persistence presence to make sure, as the head of U.S. Northcom said, you cannot defeat what you cannot see. And we
Yeah.
have to be able to detect this before we see it. So that's certainly of concern to those of us who are watching Arctic security.
And just a quick follow-up question on that. Does that require presence in Greenland to do some of that surveillance, or is that really surveillance and intelligence capabilities that need to be placed elsewhere in the Arctic?
So again, I think the challenge here is, and the reminder is that the United States has 2 vectors in the Arctic, the North Pacific and the North Atlantic. So, obviously NATO has always played a strong role and protection of the North Atlantic and those sea lanes. So what we've seen over the last several years, and again, I think this is where NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte's conversation with the president, what I suspect to see is we're going to see a more forward-leaning NATO presence and package in Greenland, North Atlantic. We're seeing where in Bodø, Norway, NATO has a combined air operations. We are seeing increasing, northern Finland, when Sweden and Finland joined NATO, we now have a multinational land command component in northern Finland. We have we reconstituted the Second Fleet in Norfolk to, again, make sure the North Atlantic is covered. So we can do more, and we need more sensors, more ISR in Greenland. And in fact, the Kingdom of Denmark has put forward nearly a $4 billion package to do just that. So really answering that call. But we need to do really the whole thing. We need stronger presence in the North Pacific Arctic, stronger presence in the North Atlantic Arctic.
Going back to Russia for just a second, has the war in Ukraine at all distracted them from their activities in the Arctic?
Yes and no. It's taken a hit on their Arctic Special Forces, their Arctic Brigade, which was based sort of on the border with Finland. That has certainly taken a hit. Their forces were sent to Kherson and 23, 24, and certainly substantial death there. But we haven't seen the impact on this longstanding Russian modernization of its nuclear submarine fleet. Haven't seen it impact the development of the so-called exotic missiles. And what we have seen now, and I think this is what we are watching closely, Russia's adaptation and production of drone capabilities will have some impact on Arctic operations for sure, as we're going to see uncrewed systems play an increasing role in that, enhanced ISR capability, as we will with LEO's polar orbits. I mean, it's just getting more eyes and ears up there will help us be able to detect and track a bit more.
And by LEOs, you're referring to low Earth orbit satellites, right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Speaking of space, President Trump in this administration has really doubled down on his desire to build the Golden Dome, a larger and more sophisticated missile defense system for the United States. How much of a factor do you think that has been in driving the renewed interest in Greenland?
So again, what's so interesting, I mean, in many ways, President Trump has really brought back the history. And honestly, America needed a little history lesson in why, Canada, the Kingdom of Denmark, Greenland, why our allies are so important to the protection of the U.S. homeland. So again, the creation of the distant early warning line of the Eisenhower administration, which again was this arc from the United States, Alaska, Canada, Greenland, to help detect early warning incoming missiles and then hopefully to defeat them. We've been modernizing the Northern Warning System through NORAD. In 2004, we upgraded the early warning radar that is based on America's most northern base, which is in Greenland, Badufik Space Base. And so we're constantly needing to modernize that architecture. I'm not a Golden Dome expert. What I have certainly understood that right now the focus is on a more space-based architecture. Again, the Arctic will play a role in that for the location of ground stations. But if this is mostly space-based, and if it's modernizing our architecture, Greenland, of course, plays a role in that early warning, but I don't believe, like we have in Alaska, we would base interceptors there. So I don't know what we need more of that Badufik does not manage. But again, the Greenlandic government, the Danish government has been extremely open. If we want to do more on Greenland, we are most welcome because we have a 1951 bilateral defense agreement that has been updated. We have a very updated defense cooperation agreement. Doors open to do more, but we have never specified, to my knowledge, to those governments what we want to do other than acquisition.
I want to come back to the 1951 agreement in just a moment and go over some of the history of bilateral U.S.-Danish relations about Greenland. But before we explore that, I just wanted to take a minute and get your perspective on the economic potential that Greenland represents. Now, you've talked about sea lanes, so the melting of the Arctic ice has opened up um, opportunities for commercial and military shipping to transit across the Arctic, which is useful for both military and commercial purposes. Administration officials have also talked about critical minerals, and Greenland, according to my research, is maybe the eighth largest stock of critical minerals in the world, but it is rather inaccessible, or at least hard to access. How do you interpret the potential for critical minerals coming out of Greenland?
The potential is enormous. And just to step back, I mean, Greenland has a very similar geology to Canada, to Alaska, to the Russian Arctic. I mean, the Arctic is mineral rich in critical minerals, absolutely. But as you highlighted, the potential has to be developed. You need the infrastructure, you need a really long time horizon for mining, and then you have to have the refining, the processing capabilities. And so what we see on Greenland very specifically has been quite a bit of activity on, giving out mining licenses to firms, Canadian, British, Australian. I think the last time I checked, there was only one US firm that actually had a mineral license. But the challenge is, of course, getting the investment and the long-term horizon to actually mine that. And this is where the infrastructure needs are great. Greenland does not have the ports, the roads to be able to bring that. Now, I think all of the interest and the focus has certainly increased that activity. There's one Tan Breeze, which is a rare earths mining that does have U.S. participation in that and getting some investment. I think we continue to track these things, and they do need to mature over time, but we're talking about a 10-year time horizon.
Oh,
So
wow.
as we're talking about Greenland, I hate to do this, Chip, but I'm gonna lean into an America first posture. I'd really love to see some of that investment in Alaska. And because, I mean, the largest iron in the world is in Alaska, the Red Dog Mine, zinc, some of those same critical minerals are in the United States as well. So hoping and our focus on Greenland, we don't forget to increase our investment opportunities in Alaska.
Gotcha. Yeah, so there's great potential, but not anything that can be tapped right away. It's going to require a lot of time, money, and
It
investment.
is. And even in the energy, I mean, several years ago, there was some initial exploration of offshore oil and gas, offshore Greenland, and there just were not the finds that would make that uh, commercially viable. And again, I mean, the geoeconomics of the Arctic are not immune to global economics. So, meaning that when commodity prices are high, energy prices are high, there's enthusiasm. Absolutely. When those prices are really low because of uh, the long time horizon, the investment that is needed, it's very, very difficult. So even what we're seeing the Chinese do with testing out the Northern Sea route, which is the maritime route that from east to west over through the Russian Arctic, we're seeing a small pickup and it's being tested, but it's not massively being used right now. But that picture could change 10, 15 years. And I think the challenge, and this is more of my, I guess, my plea, the challenge is we have to prepare for the Arctic now that we're going to get in the next 15, 20 years.
Hmm.
Policymakers just always struggle with that because it's the emergency and the urgent and the immediate. We're already late to need in what we need in icebreakers and infrastructure and persistent presence simply to protect, I believe, the United States. And if we lose this momentum, we'll be behind again. And I assure you, Russia, China, they're not galloping, but they're continuing to meet the moment. And, we've been stuck in the last 15, 20 years writing a whole bunch of strategies, which are lovely, don't get me wrong, but they're not putting the needle down on budget, multi-year
Yeah.
procurement, and preparing us for the future.
I think I recall reading some time ago that the number of U.S. icebreakers is minuscule, certainly compared to Russia or China, right?
So the United States right now has three icebreakers. We have one heavy icebreaker. And again, this is for both poles. So that icebreaker has to be used in Antarctica and the Arctic. So you got to flip your coin where you want it. And that one was built in the 1970s. It's had some catastrophic mechanical failures. But thankfully, in the first Bush administration, um, they started the process of procuring one new heavy icebreaker. That was in 2019. Unfortunately, that icebreaker has hit a lot of delays. It may not even be available until 2030, maybe even 2031.
Gosh.
We have a medium icebreaker, the Healy. That's mostly used for scientific research. It also has had some catastrophic, some fires and some oopsies. And that one also has been put into service, but it's not a heavy icebreaker. If we really have to crunch 20 to 20 feet of ice, only a heavy icebreaker will do that. And then just at the end of last year, because, heaven forbid, if one of these would go down, or God forbid, two of these would go down, we wouldn't have icebreaker capacity. So the Coast Guard purchased a commercial vessel, the Storis. It was actually, it was something that Shell purchased as they were doing their Alaskan offshore energy exploration that didn't work and no longer needed. So the Coast Guard is retrofitting that for broader purposes, but it's a commercial frame. So we are not where we need to be on icebreakers. And so the administration and the One Big Beautiful Bill has a really strong multi-billion-dollar package for the Coast Guard to start building icebreakers. And we're building icebreakers with our friends, Canada and Finland, because they have the most modern icebreaker technology. They're helping our shipyards, which haven't built one for 30 plus years, to build an icebreaker, and they're also getting some business. That's the win-win. That's the package we should be going for. But we're late. We are very, very late to building that capacity. And if you don't have persistent presence, if you're not able to conduct the maritime security that you need, well, then adversaries will take advantage of that. And we certainly see that probing by both Russia and China to see, do we have eyes and ears and can we meet them when they are exercising?
So we've talked about the adversaries and the military and the economic importance of the region and of Greenland. Let's pivot now and focus on those alliance dynamics between the United States, Denmark, and our NATO allies, which obviously has been under a lot of stress lately because of the Trump administration's sort of aggressive stance about needing to exert control over Greenland, perhaps to purchase it. There was briefly a threat of military force that's been now taken off the table. That was done last week when President Trump gave his speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos. But let's also kind of go back and understand the relationship between the United States and Denmark over the territory of Greenland. You mentioned briefly the 1951 agreement, but this isn't the only time that the United States has wanted to purchase Greenland, right?
Right. So I love talking about the history. So when the United States purchased Alaska in 1867, the thought was under the President Johnson's administration to have Greenland and Iceland again. And actually, it was so controversial to purchase Alaska at the time. They didn't think they could quite handle both. So that was sort of not pursued. Then there was sort of a bit of an interest in 1910 that flared up again. But in 1917, interestingly, when the Kingdom of Denmark sold the Danish West Indies, which is now the U.S. Virgin Islands, to the United States, the United States confirmed the Kingdom of Denmark's control over Greenland in that treaty. And then in 1946, the Truman administration quietly offered $100 million to purchase Greenland. And sort of just to step back, why? Because of the important role that Greenland played in the Second World War. There was concern when Nazi Germany was able to occupy Denmark. Could that extend to Greenland? And the Danish government gave the United States ability to defend and protect Greenland during the Second World War. And as the Cold War began, we understood we needed that. It was quietly asked. It was quietly told, no, thank you. And then 3 years later, and I think this is the history that I hope repeats itself, 3 years later, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was founded, the
Hmm.
Kingdom of Denmark being one of the 12 founding members. And so in 1949, creating that security umbrella for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark via NATO. And then 2 years later, the 1951 bilateral defense agreement, which really paved the way for the United States bilaterally to do even more for Greenland. But again, it was under the security umbrella of NATO. What we had upwards of, 12, 13 installations at the height of the Cold War. 10,000 U.S. forces were on
Wow,
Greenland.
that many.
I mean, it was a significant presence. We had strategic bombers fly out. We accidentally dropped nuclear weapons on Greenland. I mean, it's got some history there, not all glorious, but it was really important. And then, of course, at the end of the Cold War, atrophy, atrophy, atrophy. So today we have about 150 U.S. forces on our one base, Pacific Space Base in the northwest coast. Our ally Canada restocks and resupplies that base in support of us. So we really allowed it to atrophy. And as I said, beginning in 2014, Russia began to reopen its military base. It started to increase its posture. We didn't meet that. We didn't respond to that. We didn't want to militarize the Arctic. So, as I said, again, we have updated and modernized our defense cooperation, but it never had an expression of increased security posture in the Arctic. So, fast forward to Davos, President Trump threatening, all options on the table, a potential military intervention, which I have to tell you, Chip, never in my wildest imagination could I have understood that the United States was threatening military operations against another NATO ally when the door is open for the United States to do more militarily in Greenland. And so that really was, I think, a moment where the transatlantic relationship changed quite a bit. And I think we're still trying to figure out the costs and the consequences of that.
Yeah.
I think the most immediate outgrowth as I mentioned, you're going to see a more significant NATO presence in Greenland. And I think that's very much how the Danish and Greenlandic prime ministers want it. There's a lack of trust about what the US's intentions truly are.
So
So
this
I think
atrophying that you talked about was purely U.S. driven. In other words, we weren't being forced out, or there wasn't diplomatic pressure from Denmark to remove these 10,000 troops, or was it perhaps the Greenlanders themselves? Was there sort of an indigenous Greenland movement to push out American forces, or was this purely Washington's choice?
I think again it was the post Cold War peace dividend. We didn't need the forces. In fact, if anything, the Arctic was the first to thaw, literally, in U.S.-Russian relations, with Arctic environmental strategies and Gorbachev, wanting this to be a zone of peace. So, it's funny. I always call the Arctic the geopolitical bellwether. It was the first to signal thawing before actually the end of the Cold War. It was the first to, I think, signal refreeze. But the Arctic is a region, again, which I said, it feels like it is way long away and we don't have to deal with it now. And it's always the area that I think particularly and understandably the Pentagon, it's a region, their hands are full right now, busy. We don't need another region. We don't want to use precious budgetary resources to do something that doesn't feel like it's urgent. And I think that has certainly caught up to us a little bit. Now we're doing a little scramble.
So President Trump in his public remarks, before and after Davos, was saying that the United States needed to own Greenland, needed to possess it for, I think he used the phrase, for psychological purposes. Like it wouldn't be uh, meaningful unless we actually exerted control over the territory. But with this 1951 agreement, I'd just like to get your thoughts. What is it in the agreement that the United States is not allowed to do or not able to do that perhaps President Trump, through his drive for possession of Greenland, thinks the U.S. could do?
So again, the only way I can understand this as best as we can is that the president, as a real estate professional, just believes ownership is the ultimate element of control. That treaties, leasing, there's always ambiguity, and control is essential. Um, that's simply not the case, because I think the 1951 agreement does allow us to turn, and I think in the over the last year, as we applied so much pressure, there was openness. Well, what do you want? We never articulated. We didn't say, well, we'd like four bases and we'd like,
Yeah.
we just said we wanted it. Why did we want it? Because the president believes this was important. And then it felt like the security conversation, which absolutely was sort of trying to back into that justification. But I think now, I'm not sure where we are today. So 2 weeks ago, when Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio met with foreign ministers Rasmussen and Motzfeldt, they created a high-level working group, I hope, to begin to say, okay, what do we want here? Let's
Yeah.
define that, see where we
Articulate the
go.
demands, right.
Exactly. But I hope that jumps back in. But now, as I said, because things went too far, I think you'll now see resistance to, or I should say, greater transparency and understanding exactly what we want. So this is why I think the NATO role is going to be absolutely essential, that the U.S. can join, the U.S. can plus up. But this is why I think the Danish and Greenlandic prime ministers this week have been in Berlin and Paris. They're going to want their own little reassurance of more of a European NATO presence, which the United States would be welcome to
Hmm.
participate in. And in fact, in previous exercises this summer, there was a small exercise, Arctic Light. The U.S. refused to participate in it. And I don't understand that, because that's how we get to greater security. But as I said, I think we have to be clear on what we want, and it has to be now respectful of Greenlandic and Danish sovereignty and territorial integrity. And we have to rebuild trust and confidence that what we're asking for stays within that parameter and doesn't go over it.
How well positioned and capable do you see NATO right now and able to provide additional forces and provide additional security for Greenland?
Well, I mean, NATO's been behind, in my view, in assessing this. NATO has certainly had exercises, Trident Juncture. There's a substantial exercise that will take place in March in northern Norway and northern Finland, cold response. This helps us all train cold weather war fighting capabilities. It's really hard. You need special equipment. You need to practice. It's extremely difficult. So that is excellent that we continue to do that. But I think what we'll see, and I'm hoping that there'll be a pretty impressive security package that will be announced at the NATO summit in July, that will have something similar to what NATO has done in the Baltic Sea. It's called Baltic Sentry. We'll have an Arctic Sentry. So a lot more persistent NATO presence, maritime, air, a lot of exercising special forces. And again, this increases American security. We're not paying for it, but we have to be supportive of it and not, we don't want those forces to be there in some ways because they're concerned that the U.S. could take some other type of action. We just need to get this back into, I think, where we all want. We want greater Arctic security, which is greater security for the United States. And we want our European allies to do more. So we're on the cusp of victory here, I think, but we have to be responsible in how what our future role will be.
Yeah, and the president, when he was at Davos, or perhaps it was on the flight over, indicated that there was some agreement to establish a framework for security in Greenland with the NATO Secretary General that the president indicated placated much of what the U.S. was looking for. So I think it'll be critical to see what comes of this framework when it's announced. Perhaps that will be something that we'll see before July in the July NATO summit.
Yeah,
What
I'm
else
hoping
are
so.
you looking for sort of in the near term with regard to Greenland, the U.S. presence there, and the NATO response?
So I'm hoping that we hear the announcement of what, this high level working group, what it's trying to do and define. And I think it is obviously security, understanding what that looks like. I think you're absolutely right on critical minerals. There may be, uh, packages to sort of how the U.S. can be more present. Again, it could be more present now, but incentivize the private sector and public-private partnerships to do more on Greenland. And as I said, I think that's the appropriate way. I think we have to understand that there's damage done over the last 12 months, and that's going to have to be slow and careful and transparent and confidence building for both sides. I'm watching, Chip, the importance, as we talked about, of the North Pacific, Arctic, Alaska getting much more infrastructure presence there, making sure that because as I said, that's where we are watching the combined Russian-China, Chinese activity. This is not massive. I don't want to, overblow it, but it is concerning, and they continue to exercise. We're seeing Coast Guard, Chinese Coast Guard, Russian FSB action. And so I just think this is something we need to get ahead of as quickly as possible. The two other things that we're just watching, again, this is more long term, but I mentioned a lot of Chinese scientific research in the Arctic is dedicated to the seafloor and their own, cutting edge on undersea capabilities. That we've got to pay a lot of attention to, potential future seabed mining, obviously undersea cables. We've seen Russian hybrid warfare that impacts that. And then again, really paving the way for future potential Chinese, submarine activity in the North Atlantic. And then, as we mentioned, polar orbital satellites, the understanding how we can increase domain awareness and how space-based assets and ground stations in the Arctic, how that impacts. So as the Chinese call, the space and the seabed, their new strategic frontiers, I'm watching very closely because they do have important Arctic applications.
Fascinating. Heather, this has been a terrific conversation. I certainly have learned a lot from it. I really thank you for spending the time with us. Perhaps we should check in again with you later this summer after we see what develops over the next few months with regard to the framework agreement, perhaps Chinese activities as well in the Pacific region. But Heather Conley, thank you again for being on Intelligence at the Edge.
Thank you so much.
Bye.